So, most people, when they start working with me, we talk about what the experience is going to be like, including the interview prep. And you would be shocked at how little interview prep most people go through. Or maybe you wouldn't. Here's what it typically sounds like. I take the day before, I spend a couple of hours looking through my career stories, adjusting my tell me about yourself response, and trying to speak to the position. So, trying to look at the posting and align my answers to the posting, and maybe even ask ChatGPT or Claude, whatever it is, ask it, what types of questions do you think I would get? And then try to answer those questions and get the responses that you think they're going to be looking for. But when we go through the actual interview prep process, almost every single time my client says, this is way too much work for an interview because you think that it's only going to be one interview. After we're done working together and after they've gotten hired in record time, most of the time, they say something like, oh my goodness, I have left so much on the table every single time. Because we talk about so many different things when it comes to the interview. It's not just your responses, it's how you show up. It's what you do before the interview. It's what you prepare in terms of making sure that not that you speak directly to the employer, but that even before that, you have your story so crystal clear that it's incredibly persuasive. Then the layer of targeting it to your next employer, the person that you're interviewing with next, that's a small layer. But if you don't have the foundation right, that layer, it's kind of like just putting a bit of frosting on a cake that's not that great to begin with. So today, what I'm going to do is walk you through our interview kit. Our interview kit is essentially the building blocks of a good interview that we put together well before you ever get into interviews. So, in a perfect world, you would have this interview kit put together when the pressure is not on, when you have time to really dive into your experience. Okay, so here we go. You're listening to the Uncommon Career Podcast, and my name is Patricia Ortega. I am your career coach, and one of the things that I really like to work on is on interview preparation. This is because we get your story together, we help to figure out what it is that you bring to the table that's different than anybody else, and how can we pull the details that are important for that story. Not just to say, how do we target this for your employer, but how do we make this your story that cannot be duplicated? So, let's get into today's conversation, which is all about your interview kit. Think of this as the kind of high level overview of what it takes to prepare for an interview. So, if you're getting ready for a job search, this is the perfect time to think about which of these pieces do I want to carry with me. At the end of the episode, you might decide that you don't really want to create the entire interview kit in the same way that I walk you through it here, but you may realize that a couple of these pieces are really going to make a difference for you. So let's get into it. Your interview kit includes, first, a slide deck. I'm going to talk more about each of these in just a moment, but let me outline them for you so you know what's coming. The first interview kit item is a slide deck. The second is a list of competencies and psychometrics. This is a very short list, just something to keep your eye on, to focus on. Again, we'll share more about them in just a moment. Third is your tell me about yourself response. Fourth, you want to have at least 3 career stories, but if you are middle management, director, executive, you're probably going to want maybe 4 to 5 stories, maybe even 6. I probably wouldn't go with more than 6. In addition to that, you want a quick 1-page story bank. You also want to identify potential risks that the employer might see and come up with some objection handling strategies. So, all of these things are before you have an interview scheduled. So, you'd get some base questions for an employer. And finally, you'd have a thank you email template, just something to very quickly put together. You can edit and adjust later, but it's just a starting point. Okay, so let's get into just a little bit more detail on each of these items. So the first item is your slide deck. So your slide deck is essentially a version of your resume. Now, always keep in mind that if your resume, your foundation is not solid, full of metrics, explains your scope, has a good balance of the types of metrics, right? Raw numbers for every percentage. So you don't have a bunch of percentages, right? We'll talk about that in a different episode. But the point is, if you have a solid resume, then that can be leveraged into a slide deck. And what a slide deck is, it's just helping them to absorb the information and internalize that information that much faster. It also gives you an opportunity to show them your level of polish. Again, the higher you are in the career chain and the more seasoned you are as a professional, the more important it is to put together a polished slide deck. I mean, attention to detail. So, when we go into Canva, for example, we create ours for clients in Canva. When we go into Canva, one of the things that I've noticed is it can be easy to have an image that's maybe off just a little bit. And again, this clearly applies not just to Canva, but to PowerPoint, to Google Slides, to all the ways that you can create a slide deck. But sometimes the image is a little bit off, or the colors aren't the same colors, or there could be a difference in font or in placement of the title between one slide and another. There are so many ways that your slide deck can create the wrong impression. The visual layout of it, making it consistent, making it clean, making it void of too many curly cues and graphics and all of those pieces. You want to remove those. You want to keep think of like Apple or Nike, how simple, right? Just 3 colors maximum. Keep a lot of white space. We can go into more detail again in another episode, but right now I just want to lay the groundwork. You have a professionally developed slide deck. Now, as far as content, very high level view of the content here. What you're doing is you are anticipating not just their desires and what they want from this position, but you're also anticipating any questions they might have, any doubts they might have. And the interesting thing is that in your slide deck, you get to anticipate these and address them as positives before they get brought up as questions or deficits. So that's part of what you do in the slide deck. And really, you're looking to send in a maybe 5 slide slide deck before your interview. And you're looking at having a title page, a thank you page, and in between, you're looking at about 3 slides of really easy information. The biggest mistake you can make if you submit a slide deck is to have too much information because you're trying to cram everything into 3 slides. This is where it's so important to make high-level strategic decisions as to what is the most important aspect of your career that they need to know in order to make the decision to call you into the next interview. Okay. Now, the job of the slide deck, the reason we're putting the slide deck together in your interview kit is because you are going to send this to the recruiter, or if you have the contact info, you're going to send it to the hiring leader. Let's say you don't have it. You're going to send it to the recruiter and say, hey, Amy, this slide deck I'm just sending it ahead for the hiring leader ahead of my interview this morning, or ahead of my interview this afternoon. So you're going to schedule this the night before or a couple days before. You want to schedule this email so you're not kind of, feeling rushed sending it in the morning. But you want to schedule that email with the slide deck, just a couple of slides at like 5, 6 in the morning. So it's at the top of their inbox, that it's not rushing you to get up in the morning and send that slide deck out. What that does is a couple different things. The first thing is that slide deck gives you extra confidence. Why? Because the hiring leader or the committee, and maybe even the recruiter, is going to say, wow, this is something different. We haven't seen this sometimes from any candidate, sometimes from very, very, very few candidates. Most of the time, I've heard people say, I've never seen someone submit this. So it just depends what industry you're in and whether or not that's common. For most people, they haven't really seen too many slide decks, so it's a helpful bonus. Now, when people say, oh my goodness, no one's ever sent this in, this is so sharp, because you made it look perfect, right? If we are putting together something that looks sloppy, it's better to not send it because it's going to give an impression. The point is that if you're going to submit a slide deck, make sure it is perfect. Okay, so again, you're going to send this in the morning. It's going to give you confidence because they're probably going to make a comment. And even if they don't, when you walk into the room, they will already, and this is the second reason why a slide deck is so helpful, they will already have a really good idea of who you are as a professional. And also, in their mind, you're already a step ahead of the game because you have communicated to them well before you even walk in the room. So you come in already at an advantage. Now, the third reason why the slide deck is super helpful is because of the information in the slide deck. So, if done correctly, your slide deck will speak to them in a way that's kind of like saying, you answered questions like you read my mind. We haven't even spoken, but I can tell you already understand me. I can tell you already know what our team needs, and you're giving me exactly that. And that is what a leader wants. Whether it's an executive, a CEO, a middle manager, a director, they want the people that are on their team to know, hey, I'm just going to give you exactly the information you need to make a decision, and I'm not going to waste your time with details that are not essential. So, this is where your strategic thinking comes into play, and you want to narrow everything down to just 3 slides with not a lot of text in it. I would do about 3 points per slide. Maybe there's like an extra bullet or 2 per point, but not more than that. And also in your slide deck, I would vary maybe 1 or 2 slides that maybe are a little bit less dense, and maybe there's 1 slide that's a little bit more dense. There's a whole lot of work that goes into this because it is coming from the resume. So you have a solid resume, and that gets leveraged into your slide deck. But if you have your resume ready to go and you feel really confident about it and you want to put that slide deck together, this is what we're talking about. Okay, let's move on from the slide deck. This is going to go faster. The slide deck, the tell me about yourself, and the 3 career stories are the ones that we'll spend just a little bit more time on. Everything else is like a 5-minute job, okay? So the first one of those 5-minute jobs is the competencies and psychometrics. So essentially the easiest way to get this done, because this part is not crazy important, but it just helps you to get in the right mindset. What I want you to do is take the job posting. Maybe you have 3 job postings that reflect the same position you're targeting. You're going to pop those 3 job postings into any artificial intelligence engine, and you're essentially going to tell it that it is a master career coach. And it's also a hiring leader for those particular roles you're popping into the AI system. And what you want is for it to give you a list of competencies that the hiring leader is looking for, and a list of psychometrics. Now, sometimes these competencies and psychometrics overlap, and sometimes they don't. And again, we could do a whole entire episode on competencies and psychometrics, but the short of it is that a competency is a skill that you are building. A psychometric is a quality, a characteristic. Think of it as like a personality style in some sense, right? So competency would be project management. A psychometric, well, psychometrics really are a little bit different. There's more to it. I'm not going to get too into it here, but the point is that what you're looking for are what are the qualities in a candidate that are, in a sense, untrainable. Now, I think you can learn almost any skill, but if you're in sales, for example, a hiring leader is likely going to look for someone that is highly resilient, very confident, able to talk to anybody, right? So there's certain qualities that they believe, hey, this probably can't be taught in a short period of time. And so competencies and psychometrics. So you're going to get a long list from AI because that's what AI likes to do. It likes to give you everything under the sun, and then ask you a question about, would you like this other giant list that you don't need? So what you're going to do is take a look at that list of competencies, take a look at that list of psychometrics, and then you're going to decide, what are the top 1, 2, or 3 things that I really want to hone in on? For some people, you're looking at the 3 things that differentiate you versus others. For other people, you're thinking, hey, I kind of have a bit of a gap here. I have some experience, but I really want to leverage that, right? So for some, it'll be leveraging a strength. And for some, it'll be leveraging the fact that, hey, I have a bit of a gap here, but I do have something to work with. So I'm going to overcome objections by focusing in on this throughout my entire interview. Okay, that's a quick one. Competencies and psychometrics. Again, all you're doing is you're getting an AI list. You're looking at the top 2 or 3 that you want to focus on, just to keep those in mind as you build out the rest of your interview kit. Okay, so now the third piece in your interview kit is your tell me about yourself response. Now you aren't even in the job search yet. You haven't even gotten your first interview, but your tell me about yourself response is so important. This is typically the first 3 minutes of your conversation with the hiring leader. If done right, there's research that shows that hiring decisions get made in the first minute. I think there's this research study that literally says in the first 10 seconds. So You may not actually get to start your tell me about yourself response before their mind is made up, but having that very first response ready to go is going to be so important. Because if you start your tell me about yourself response and it feels a little unclear, maybe you kind of feel in your head like, I feel like I'm all over the place, or I don't have any metrics here, or I don't really know exactly how to express my career history and how it aligns with that role. How you feel on the inside will come out on the outside. So, your tell me about yourself response is the only response that I personally would recommend to get down word for word. Everything else, I don't think you should get down word for word. But your tell me about yourself response, because you know the question they're going to ask you. It is incredibly rare for a hiring leader or hiring committee to not begin an interview with, tell us a little bit about yourself, or tell us what brought you here. It might be phrased differently. It might just say, introduce yourself to us, or how does your experience align with our position? Notice they all really are the same thing, right? The opener question is always an opportunity for you to share your experience as it pertains to their position. So if you can get this one word for word, not just until you get it right, but until you cannot get it wrong, that's when it starts to feel more natural. For a lot of my clients, actually, most, if not all of my clients, when they start working on their tell me about yourself response, inevitably, I hear something like, I don't really like it being word for word. It just feels so fake. And I'm like, well, of course it does. It doesn't feel like you because even though you drafted it, you're still reading it word for word. It's not authentically coming out of you. But because we want to be prepared, we do want to know this word for word. Now, ultimately, are you going to say it exactly word for word? No. But you've got to practice it to where you know you're going to hit every single metric, every single outcome, every single transition, because when you make a transition, that's an opportunity for persuasion. When you make that you talk about your ending, that's an opportunity to show your confidence. When you shift from one position to another, that's an opportunity to explain your story of growth between that, right? Why did you choose to leave one position and go into the next? You could just say, well, then I went into this other position and lose that opportunity altogether. Or you could talk about your first experience and then as a transition sentence, explain what it is that you were looking to grow in and why you went into that next position. So what you're doing here is you're building out a very intentional story where every single sentence, practically every single word, conveys value. It's either going to convey, I have initiative, I'm growth oriented, I bring the outcomes you need, I have the tools you need. Every sentence has a purpose in your tell me about yourself response. Okay, I could go on and on and on about your tell me about yourself response, but we'll leave it at that for now. That's one you really want to spend your time on. Okay, we are at 20 minutes here. Let me start wrapping it up. But before we do that, your 3 career stories is the next part I'm going to spend just a little more time on, and then everything else is downhill from there. So, 3 career stories. This is so important, and yet it's not word for word. So, your 3 career stories are just as important as your tell me about yourself response, because when you go into the interview room, you're going to be asked anywhere from maybe 7 on the very low end to 10, maybe even more questions than 10. 10's usually a good rough, good ballpark. But you're going to be asked these 10 questions and you're going to give 10 unlinked separate answers. Most people treat the interview like a Q&A. You walk in there, you sit down, you tell them you're telling me about yourself. They ask you a question, you answer. They ask you the next question, you answer. They ask you the next question, you answer. And by the end of the interview, you've essentially answered 10 questions that don't have connections to each other. And so they leave with 10 pieces of unrelated information. It's related to what they asked, of course, but they can't put the puzzle pieces together. So what you want is to have 3 career stories that you know so well. You don't have to have them, memorized word for word. You just need to understand how you want to express those stories. What is impactful about them? What was really challenging in those stories? How was your strategic thinking displayed in those stories? Maybe you anticipated issues or considered things that others would have missed. You want to think really deeply about those three career stories to build a full, rich story, almost as if they were going to make a movie about each of those three stories. Because at the end of the interview, what you want them to walk away with is not 10 responses to 10 unrelated questions. You want them to walk away with a really deep understanding of three career stories. So when they ask one question about, let's say they say, tell me about a time when you faced a big challenge at work. You're going to share career story one. The next question, they'll say, well, tell me about a time where you've had a really big impact in your marketing department and cross functionally. You're going to share a different career story. But then 2 or 3 questions later, they're going to say, well, now tell us about a time when you handled a really large budget and you had, unanticipated issues come up with that budget. How did you manage that and how did you come forward? You can go back to that first story and say, do you remember when I talked to you about XYZ, whatever that first story was? You remember when I talked to you about that? Well, that situation actually had the same thing going on. It had this huge budget, but that budget was not only changed, it was pulled from under us just 3 months before the launch. And then you start going into your story. And what happens is it's kind of like they have a dice. And in question 1, you shared one side of that dice. In question 6, you shared another side of that dice. And maybe, and actually very intentionally, at the very beginning, you actually were intentional enough to hint at those 3 stories in your tell me about yourself response in just one sentence. So then they are in your tell me about yourself response. They're in question 1, maybe a story's in question 6. By the time they leave, they don't have 10 unrelated responses. They have 3 really good stories. They have a better understanding of how you worked, not just that you know budgets and that you've been through challenges, but that you've been through a challenge in which there was a budget and here was a scope and here was the impact. And here's a kind of, let me paint a picture for you of how it is that I work. Okay, so slide deck, competencies and psychometrics. Your tell me about yourself and your career stories are what you're probably going to spend the most time on. And it's all down here from here. So we're about to wrap this up. After your career stories, the next part of your interview kit is a story bank. So a story bank sounds really involved. It sounds just as involved as the tell me about yourself response and the 3 career stories, but it's actually not. What you're doing is you're looking through your resume, you're jogging your memory, and you're just getting down a clean 1-pager of your career stories, and you're organizing them by rough category. So you're putting them into buckets. Maybe there is a bucket that really is around fiscal responsibility and budgetary management. Maybe another bucket is around leadership and change management. The point is that on this one page, you have a really at a glance way of looking at all your career stories. Now, why is this helpful? It's helpful because when you get an interview, and let's say it's the day before the interview, let's say it's even 30 minutes before the interview, you don't want too much information in your head. I had a client one time bring me, she said, I'm preparing for my interview and, I think I'm doing a really good job. And she was doing a fantastic job. However, here's the part that made it difficult for her. I said, okay, send me what you have and we will, optimize it and go from there. She sent me a list of 100 questions with answers to all 100. There is no way we can remember what our answers are to 100 questions. Now, I think that's a fantastic exercise to go through and say, how do I want to answer each of these questions? I think that's great preparation. But when you get into the interview, when the nerves kick in, when the pressure is on, it becomes too much to hold. But if you bring it down to a 1 page of stories that are categorized, right? So 1 page makes it easy, categorized makes it even easier. You can obviously review that every day before your interview, just so your hippocampus does the work of putting that into your long-term memory and you're familiar with it when you come into the interview. But you can also take it right into your interview and just have it in your portfolio. Take a quick look at it if you need to. If someone asks you a question and you're like, "Oh, that's a great question." You might take a quick peek and be like, "I have a list of stories here. Let me share this one with you." Okay, so slide deck, competencies and psychometrics. Tell me about yourself, 3 career stories, and your story bank. Now, the next one is objections or risks and objections handling. So, every hiring leader has something that keeps them up at night and they become very stressed about hiring. I just saw a LinkedIn post, I think it was this morning, that talked about a recruiter that had made an offer, but that offer took a little bit longer than expected. So they made their offer, they negotiated, and they sent out the contract. They were about to get it signed. And everybody was excited, and the recruiter had told the hiring leader about the start date, and the hiring leader was making plans. And then the candidate sends a text message to the recruiter and says, "I'm so sorry. This is terrible timing, but my company has actually really made me an offer I can't refuse. They matched your salary and they've promoted me and, I'm going to have to turn down the offer. I still appreciate all the time that you've taken to interview me, but I'm going to have to pull out." That is an employer's worst nightmare. And even worse is going into a position and at the 90 days or even before the 90 days, somebody quits because it wasn't a good fit. Either they're bored and it's not challenging enough, it doesn't pay enough, so they continued looking, or it's too challenging and this candidate maybe made a great impression during the interview, but didn't really know exactly what they were answering questions about. Okay, so the reason I'm sharing this with you is because these kinds of issues keep employers up at night. And so they're always looking for those red flags. Are you going to be bored in this position? Do you know what you're doing? Like, truly know what you're doing? Can you make an impact in this position? Or was your previous environment just a, well-resourced environment? And no matter what you did, you were going to succeed. Is the success you've had because of you, or is it because of the organization and the resources you had? The reason we are bringing this up, I'm connecting the dots here to objections and risk. And so what you want to do in this objections and risk section is put the employer hat on, and you can always use AI if you want, but I recommend to start with kind of what you know in your context before you ever toss it into AI. So what you want to do is take a look at your resume, take a look at the 3 postings or 4 postings, basically the types of positions that you're going after, and ask yourself, what would an employer be worried about? What would the red flags be on their mind? What are some potential objections? I'll give you some examples here, but there's a myriad of these. So a couple of examples are you're moving from one industry to another, from a small company and a series of small companies in your career to a larger one, from a unionized environment to a non-unionized environment, from leading one team to leading multiple managers in different teams. Maybe you're going from a really well-respected, well-known company to a smaller organization. All of these are potential risks. These are employers are thinking, "Oh, she's not going to be happy here. She's going to be bored, or she's going to be challenged, or whatever the case might be. This is not going to be a good fit. This is going to be more chaotic for her. She's used to structure and this is a startup." So think about what could those objections be? What could the risk be? And then you want to use that information to decide how you want to counter that risk. And in a perfect world, you would counter that risk before it ever shows up as a question from the employer. Here's a couple ways that you can do it. In that objections and risks section, what I typically do is have clients write down those potential objections and we brainstorm some of those. Usually it's like 2 or 3, like at the core, it's like 2 or 3 things at most. For each of those, we decide, how can we bring this up in a positive light, whether it's in your slide deck or in your tell me about yourself response, or as one of your questions? So one potential example, and then we'll move on from here into one of the last items here. One potential example is, let's say that you are moving from a director level position and you've decided you want to slow down a little bit. Life is getting busy personally, and you actually really enjoyed being a middle manager. and you're saying, okay, I'm going to take this step down. I'm going to be a middle manager for a while, but I'm concerned that I'm not going to get hired because they're going to think I'm overqualified. But see, here's the thing. What's the upside to that? So always consider what's the upside that the hiring leader is getting and then play that up. So in this case, the hiring leader potentially could get a pretty amazing deal because they are paying middle manager salary for the expertise. Now, you should still stick to the role of the middle manager and not be doing the work at the scope of director, but they're going to get the expertise of a director. However, the things that are going to be on their mind are, is she going to be able to take direction from our director? The second thing, is she going to be bored? And the third thing, what's wrong? Right? When you get a deal that's too good, you're like, what's the catch? So think about those three things. And now, okay, in our tell me about yourself response, let's talk about why you're shifting. Maybe you're saying, I have been in a director position for the past 10 years. And one thing I've noticed is, I haven't gotten an opportunity to really see the ins and outs, the everyday, work of our team on the front lines. And I want to get back to that so that I can continue to learn. And I've really missed that opportunity. Whatever it is, that we usually spend time crafting this and figuring out what is true and genuine for you. If it's not genuine, it will not come across as genuine. But this is what you're doing. You're figuring out what are the obstacles and how can I express them before they come up. Another really quick obstacle before we move on here is maybe you have a gap. Maybe you're in human resources, but you are strong everywhere except for on the analytics side. What you can do is in your slide deck, for example, you can include one slide that says what I'm currently working on. And that could be a data analytics for HR course, or maybe your mid-certificate. So this is another way that you can fill the gap before it's noticed. Okay, let's move on now. But I wanted to give you a couple of examples. Let's move on to wrap this up because we are at 34 minutes. Okay, almost the last one is questions for the employer. I'm not going to spend too much time here because we all know what these are. We're very familiar with these, but there's the typical question that can be asked of any environment, of any position, of any company. And those are great, but you want some base questions that are really specific to your environment, to the types of organizations that you are looking to get hired by, to your industry, to your role, to what's going on currently in the market or trends that you're seeing in your space. So think about some of those questions so that if you run late on time and maybe you haven't gotten a chance to research questions, your questions don't sound generic. They still sound like they're tuned in to their world. Okay. The last one, thank you email. That one's pretty self-explanatory. You want to put together 1 or 2 thank you email templates. Think of this as just you're anticipating the nerves at the end of the call. Here's the thing. If you've done really well in an interview, you might just want to go and celebrate right after the call. If you didn't do so hot though, you might be in your head. And it's so hard to write a positive and genuine email when your mind is telling you, I think I bombed, I think I bombed, I think I bombed. It's going to show up in your communication. So being able to write something when you're in a neutral state and being able to really think it through, right? If I just went on an interview, what do I want to share? I want to share something very specific from the interview. I want to thank them for their time. I want to let them know that I'm even more interested now than I was before, and here's why, using a specific piece of information I learned from the interview or after talking with so-and-so and so-and-so and inserting the names. Put together a couple different emails that really show your personality, your professionalism, your enthusiasm. And while these are templates, they show your real personality. And then, of course, it's going to be that much easier to pop in some details, review, edit, and send off. So then you can either go and celebrate or take a break because that was a grueling interview. So that's it. When I help clients prepare, we always put together an interview kit. It may sound like it takes a long time, but what really takes a long time is the tell me about yourself response and the 3 career stories. You want to spend several hours on that. And, time doesn't equal quality, right? So just because you spend several hours on it doesn't mean that it's going to turn out great. So you just want to be intentional about it. And however little or however long it takes, make sure you have 3 solid career stories that essentially they showcases and embodies the work that people are looking to do. A tell me about yourself response that sets the tone for the entire conversation and introduces your 3 career stories, and your slide deck, which is going to help to make an impression before your first impression in person. Okay. That's pretty much it. Slide deck, competencies and psychometrics. Tell me about yourself, 3 career stories, your story bank, objections and risk handling, questions for the employer, and thank you email templates. In the kit that I have for clients, I'd say 6, 7 out of these, 8, 9 items are like 5-minute items that you do once and then you don't have to worry about. And then the rest are pieces that you target a little bit from interview to interview. Listen, I hope this has been really helpful. I know that sometimes the episodes that I do tend to be really dense and give you a lot of information, but I would love for you to say, okay, I need to prepare for an interview or I need to prepare for a job search, right? This is not the episode to share with someone if they've got 30 minutes for an interview. This is the episode to share with somebody if they're about to get into the job search and they want to do it right. They want to go all the way, leave nothing to chance. This is what we do. And this is how we get clients hired in sometimes the first interview, sometimes the first 2 or 3 interviews. Now, if you're making a career pivot, just want to give you a heads up, it will probably take longer. That is normal, especially in this market. But if you're fully qualified and you're getting interviews and you're not getting to the offer, these items are really going to make a big difference. All right, I'm going to let you go before I get to this 40-minute mark here. Have a wonderful week. Know that Denise and I are praying for you. We're cheering you on, and we'll see you on the next one. Hey, thanks for listening. I really appreciate you spending time with me today. If you found this episode helpful, please tap the 5-star review on the show's homepage in your podcast app. It would absolutely make my day, and it helps others discover the Uncommon Career Podcast. Now, to download your free career resources and learn how I help seasoned professionals land amazing offers in as little as 90 days, click on the link in the description or go to theuncommoncareer.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next one.